They said it was a surprise party. I suppose the surprise was that I showed up, the conference room. Had balloons, limp and half-hearted, and a tray of cupcakes from the grocery store down the street. Someone had scribbled Happy Retirement. Margaret. On a crooked banner, the T in retirement was missing. I stood in the doorway, straightening my blouse, clutching my purse like armor. 35 years. That's how long I'd served this company. First as a file clerk, when we still used carbon copies, then front desk admin, later office manager. I knew every light bulb that flickered, every copier that jammed. Every soul that came through this building looking lost. But today, no one looked at me like they used to. They looked through me. As if I were already gone, my son Brian was standing near the back, laughing with his colleagues, tailored blazer, drink in hand. He didn't even look up when I entered. I forced a smile. "Well, this is lovely," I murmured. The intern's sweet girl named April came running up to hug me. "Ms. Margaret, I'm so happy I caught you. I made you something." She handed me a folded card, hand-drawn daisies, and the words, "You're the reason I survived my first month here." My throat tightened. I slipped it into my purse gently, like it was fragile glass dot. There were claps, a forced toast. Brian raised a glass, barely glancing my way. "To Mom, Margaret, thanks for keeping things together all these years." The crowd chuckled politely. No speech. No slideshow. No stories. I stood in front of a cupcake table while they talked shop. Then I heard it Brian's. Voice low but not low enough. "Why is she even here? We're already phasing her out." The words sliced through me like paper cuts. Thin, fast, but bleeding. He laughed. Someone else chuckled nervously. I froze. It wasn't that he said. It was how he said it. Like I was a burden. Like I had overstayed in a life that I built for him brick by brick. I blinked hard. No tears, not here. I reached for my coat. No one noticed. Not even when I slipped out the side door and walked into the cool evening. Heels clicking against the sidewalk outside. The wind was soft and the sky hung with the pink tint of sunset. I walked slowly past the parking lot down the street where I used to wait for the bus when Brian was still small. Still sweet back then. I'd pick him up from daycare with blistered feet and $1 left in my pocket. I'd hold his hand all the way home and tell him he could be anything. Now he's someone, and I'm no one at home. I changed into my house dress and heated up leftover lasagna. Sat in silence. The clock ticked loudly in the kitchen. A celebration, they said. I opened April's card again. "You're the reason I survived my first month here. Thank you for every smile, every note, every you got this." I pressed the card to my chest and cried. Not for the party. Not even for Brian. I cried because I had given everything. And no one had seen it. But April had. And that card, that one gesture, it whispered something I hadn't heard in a long time. "You still matter." I went to bed with tear-stained cheeks. And a new kind of silence. Not the silence of being ignored. The silence before something begins. Asterisk. It wasn't the first time I'd been invisible. The thing about aging, especially as a woman, needs that the world doesn't take your silence as strength. It takes it as surrender. I had been quiet all my life. Not because I didn't have things to say, but because I had spent so many years carrying others on my back. I didn't have the breath left to speak. I lay in bed the morning after the so-called retirement party, eyes open, watching sunlight crawl across the ceiling. My apartment was modest, one bedroom, a little balcony that overlooked a noisy street. A kitchen that still had sunflower tiles from the 90s, but it was mine. Paid off, safe, peaceful. I got up and poured myself a cup of coffee, sat at the little round table by the window, looked through the photos pinned to my fridge. Brian in his cap and gown from high school. Brian with his first carryout had saved 2 years for that down payment. Brian holding my hand after he got promoted to assistant manager. "Couldn't have done it without you, Mom," he'd said then. What changed? I traced the edge of the photo with my fingertip. Maybe nothing changed. Maybe he just stopped pretending. Brian had always been ambitious. Even as a boy, he wanted things bigger, better, shinier. I used to think it was my job to make sure he didn't feel the absence of his father. When Greg died, I didn't have time to grieve not properly. Brian was 4. I was 29. No family around, no time to fall apart. So I worked. Days, nights, weekends. Picked him up from school on my lunch breaks. Packed his lunch with handwritten notes that said, "You are strong. You are loved." When he got sick, I stayed up all night at his bedside, rubbing circles on his back like my mother used to do for me. He never went without. Except, maybe, for the lesson that gratitude isn't optional. My phone buzzed on the table. "Hope you're resting today. You deserve it, April." That girl had known me for 5 months. She remembered me more than my own son did. I smiled faintly, replied with a "thank you," then sat there for a long time, cup in hand, staring into the steam. Around noon, I stepped out onto the balcony. Across the street, a young couple were moving into an apartment. They laughed as they struggled with a couch too wide for the door. I used to laugh like that. When Greg was alive, before life hardened around me like old bread. That night, I pulled out a box from the top of my closet. Inside were my old notebooks, work logs mostly. Notes on system improvements I'd written up but never submitted. Training manuals I'd created unofficially because it wasn't part of my role. But someone had to do it. At the bottom of the stack was a folder labeled Promotion Application -2007. I opened it slowly. A letter I never sent. Back then, I had all the qualifications. But when Brian broke his arm and needed surgery, I had pulled my application. I couldn't afford the extra hours. The promotion went to someone else I had made that sacrifice for. Brian, I had made every sacrifice for Brian, and he had erased them with a single sentence. Why is she even here? A week passed in quiet. I spent my mornings reading on the balcony, my afternoons organizing, sorting, thinking. I didn't call Brian. He didn't call me. On Thursday, I visited the local library. There was a career workshop being held for retirees looking to rejoin the workforce or mentor young professionals. I wasn't planning to stay. I just needed to get out of the apartment. But then a speaker started sharing her journey, how she'd retired early, only to realize she still had so much to give. "We're not expired," she said. "We're experienced." People clapped. I didn't, but something inside me stirred. Afterward, as I was heading for the exit, a woman called after me. "Excuse me? Margaret, right? You trained me 5 years ago at Haverly Corp. I was a mess back then, spilling coffee, mixing up reports, crying in the stairwell." I blinked, trying to place her. "I'm Julie. You gave me a sticky note that said, 'You're not the mess.' The system is—" I still have it taped to my desk. I smiled, stunned. "You changed my whole career," she added. "You still doing trainings?" "No," I said. "I'm retired." Her brows furrowed. "That's a loss for everyone." That night, I couldn't sleep. Not because I was angry anymore, but because the silence inside me was growing too loud to ignore. I had poured decades into a company that treated me like a chair, useful, sturdy, but easily replaced. I had built a son who no longer remembered who built him. But not everyone forgot. And if even one person still remembered what I had given, then maybe I wasn't done giving. Maybe this wasn't the end. Ms. Margaret. I looked up from the community bulletin board at the local center. A young man in his 20s with nervous energy and a messenger bag slung across his chest was smiling awkwardly at me. "Yes, I'm Caleb. I run the youth business incubator program across the hall. We met last week briefly at the career workshop. You asked about mentorship programs, right?" I said, trying to place his face. "You're the one who spilled coffee on his folder during the Q&A. He laughed, cheeks turning red. "Guilty? Still recovering from the trauma." I smiled. He had that eager look in his eye, the kind that reminded me of new interns fumbling. With staplers and over-apologizing, I've been thinking, he said. You mentioned you used to train administrative teams, right? Well, we've got 3 startups here run by young founders who could really use help with process structuring, admin flow, stuff they don't teach in business school. Would you be willing to maybe sit with them as a consultant? I blinked. You want me to mentor them? If you're open to it? Just once a week to start. I hesitated. I had come to that center to pick up a flyer on knitting groups, maybe try a book club. Not this. Then I remembered Julie. The sticky note. The look in her eyes when she said, "You changed my career. I'll give it a try," I said softly. By the following week, I was sitting across from a young woman named Mia, founder of a small sustainable fashion startup. Her desk was buried under piles of samples, invoices, and half-finished Toto lists. "I just feel like I'm constantly playing catch-up," she said, rubbing her temples. I never even have time to think. I looked at the chaos. "You need a system." She nodded, embarrassed. "That's what Caleb said. But systems overwhelm me." "Then let's start small," I said, standing up. "Where's your whiteboard?" We color-coded tasks by priority, sorted her inbox, created a morning check-in routine. 2 hours later, she sat back and sighed. "I feel like I can breathe for the first time in months." I smiled. Good systems do that. As I walked out, Caleb caught me in the hallway. "You're a hit," he said. "Mia already asked if you'd come back next week." Next week. Wasn't this a one-time thing? He shrugged. "I might have promised you'd be around. Also, I have another founder who needs serious help." And another. After that, I rolled my eyes. "You tricked me. Technically, I inspired you." I laughed a full belly laugh, the kind I hadn't felt since before Brian started calling me extra. By month's end, I had become Ms. M25 startup teams. I taught them how to handle contracts, structure admin roles, write effective job descriptions. And more than anything, how to respect the people behind the operations. You can't build a castle if you treat your bricks like they're disposable. I told them one morning. Caleb was beaming as he watched the group scribble that down like gospel. Then, on Friday afternoon, as I was packing up, Caleb knocked on the edge of my open door. "You have a visitor," said with a strange grin. I looked up and froze. Standing behind him, straightening his expensive suit, was Darren Weber. He was one of the board members at Haverly Corp. My old company, Margaret. He said, stepping in and shaking my hand. "Been a long time, it has," I said cautiously. "What brings you here? I've heard you're doing remarkable work with these young folks. My daughter's one of them, actually. You helped streamline her production team?" "Mia," he chuckled. She said, quote, "This woman has more leadership in her left hand than the entire C-suite. I figured I should come see for myself." I didn't know what to say. Then he added, more seriously, "And we need your help." Over coffee the following week, Darren explained. "Ever since you left, there's been tension. Brian stepped into management, but morale is down. 3 team leads have quit. There's backlog in finance and operations. Nothing's on time." I listened, sipping calmly. "We need someone to assess things, quietly. A consulting audit." I raised an eyebrow. "You want me to come back?" "As an external consultant. You won't report to Brian, you'll report directly to the board." I stirred my coffee. "You sure that won't be awkward?" He smiled. "Awkward, we can survive. Imploding, not so much." I looked out the window. Coming back wasn't part of the plan. But the thought of walking through those halls, not as a relic but as a force, stirred something old and sharp in me. "Dignity, double quotes fine," I said. "But I do things my way, quietly, thoroughly, and I want full access. You've got it." My return to Haverly was not met with cheers. Some jaws dropped. Some whispers buzzed. Brian looked like he'd seen a ghost. He approached me in the elevator, stiff-lipped. Didn't realize they were letting retirees audit now. I smiled politely. Didn't realize they let directors run teams with missing reports and zero retention. His face darkened. This isn't a game, Mom, I said calmly. It's business. I walked off the elevator and left him stewing behind me. Over the next few weeks, I moved like a shadow. I asked questions, listened carefully, took notes. I talked to the mailroom staff, the janitors, the frustrated middle managers, too afraid to speak up. One woman teared up. She used to feel like we were part of a family. Now it's just numbers. I knew what she meant. Brian had reduced the workplace to a machine, but forgot that machines rust when you don't care for the hands that run them. I compiled my report slowly, thoroughly, with facts, not feelings, but every page told a story. A story of what happens when you erase the very people who make your power possible. Asterisk, I walked into Haverly headquarters on a rainy Monday morning, same building I'd walked into for 35 years. But this time, my ID badge was temporary. Visitor, external consultant, a title meant to be neutral, but in this case, it might as well have read Winds of Change. The receptionist, a new girl named Calla, stood up quickly. Good morning, ma'am. You're here for the board? I smiled. I'm here to observe. Don't worry, I won't be in your way. She looked relieved. The newer staff didn't know me. I wasn't part of their history. I was just an older woman with a clipboard and a polite nod. But the veterans, the ones who'd been through the merger, the restructuring, the pandemic, they watched me like I was a ghost walking the halls. And Brian was rattled. I first saw him in the elevator 2 days into my silent audit. He was checking his phone, flanked by 2 assistants, barking something about vendor invoices. His gaze lifted on froze. Mom. I nodded once. Brian. His assistants both glanced up in surprise. Didn't realize you'd be walking around. My department, he said, forcing a tight smile. Oh, I'm walking everywhere, I said calmly. Procurement, finance, facilities, HR, even the break room. Who approved this? The board, I replied smoothly. You can confirm with Darren Weber if you'd like. I believe you two spoke just last week. The elevator doors opened. I stepped out. Brian stayed behind. Lips pressed so tight they disappeared into his face. I kept my visits unassuming. I sat in the corners of meetings, observed body language, counted interruptions, noted when Brian cut off staff mid-sentence, when junior associates left meetings deflated and unheard. I saw how late emails were sent at night, demanding, frantic, panicked, not because of urgency, because of poor planning. I also noticed that the coffee machine still sputtered in the same, annoying way it did 3 years ago, and no one had fixed it. A small thing, yes, but small things reveal big things. One afternoon, I walked past Clara, the head of HR for over a decade, and stopped. Clara, I said, how are you managing with the new onboarding software? She sighed. Or not. It crashes during training. I flagged it to Brian twice, but he said it's not a priority. Right now, and morale. She looked at me, then away. It's sinking. The good people are leaving. The rest are walking on eggshells. I scribbled in my notes. She leaned closer. It's not the company that's broken, Margaret. It's the leadership. A week later, I met with the board in the glass conference room I once prepared coffee. For now, I was at the head of the table. Gentlemen, I began, and ladies, thank you for trusting me with this task. I've compiled a full report, but let me summarize what you need to know in plain English. 12 sets of eyes turned to me. This company is hemorrhaging talent because fear has replaced trust. The leadership model right now is reactive, not strategic. Decisions are made to preserve power, not progress. And most importantly, I slid forward 3 sheets of paper. These are exit interviews from the last month, unofficial, conducted by me. Darren picked one up. Another board member, Elaine, read aloud. I loved this company, but I couldn't keep working for someone who views people as tools. Margaret understood people. Brian doesn't even learn our names. The room went still. Darren. cleared his throat. Do you believe the current director can be coached? I paused, deliberate. I believe a good leader doesn't have to be the smartest person in the room. They just have to listen to the ones who are. And Brian folded my hands. He's not listening. Not to staff. Not to outcomes. Not to consequences. You promoted a resume, not a person. They exchanged glances. Elaine leaned in. What would you recommend? I didn't flinch. A transitional leader for 2 years. Someone with legacy knowledge and people-first management. Someone to rebuild the bridge Brian burned. Darren raised an eyebrow. Are you offering Margaret? I smiled faintly. I'm available. That night, Brian showed up at my apartment. I opened the door in my robe, still sipping herbal tea. What are you doing? He said, voice sharp. Ah, are you seriously trying to take my job? I stepped aside. Come in. Let's not have a neighborly show. He walked in, pacing. This was supposed to be my chance. I've worked for this for years. You walked into a promotion I turned down twice when you were still in school. I said calmly. And you've used it to silence the very people who made your role possible. I made that department efficient. You made it afraid. I turned to me, suddenly, less angry and more desperate. Why now? Why you? I looked at him long and hard. Because at my own retirement party, you didn't even look me in the eye. You called me a phase-out, and worse than that, you believed it. His shoulders sank. You raised me to win, he said quietly. No, I said, I raised you to care. Silence stretched between us. Then he stormed out. 2 days later, the announcement was made internally. Margaret Allen, interim. Director of Operations, effective immediately. I walked into the same office Brian used to occupy. The staff clapped softly. Some teared up. Clara brought flowers. Brian. He had been moved to a special projects role under a T-lateral move. No staff, no strategy, no power. I didn't celebrate his demotion. I mourned it, quietly. It's because I never wanted to defeat my son. I only wanted to be seen by him. And now, maybe he finally saw me. Or maybe he just saw the corner office he thought was his. Either way, I was done being invisible. Asterisk, my new office still smelled like Brian's cologne. It clung to the leather chair and the corners of the bookshelves. Subtle, sharp, expensive. I let the windows stay open for 3 days until the room smelled like fresh air and eucalyptus oil instead. Something softer, calmer, honest. I didn't rearrange the furniture. I didn't paint the walls. I didn't need to leave a mark. I was the mark. And as word spread across departments, something shifted. People started knocking on my open door, not with complaints, but with trust. Team leads who'd gone silent under Brian's rule now brought up ideas, feedback, suggestions. Can we revisit the vendor contract terms? I think we need more mental health resources in Q4. Is it okay if I speak openly here? Yes, always yes. And each time I looked them in the eye, listened fully, and said, thank you for saying what needed to be said, but behind closed doors, things weren't that simple. Late one Friday afternoon, Clara slipped into my office, clutching a folder like it might burn her hands. Brian's been calling meetings with junior staff, she said quietly. He's pushing for process changes outside his scope. I frowned. Is he violating any formal policies? No, but it feels like sabotage. He's trying to prove he's still relevant. Or that you're not. I rubbed my temples. Does the board know? They do now, she said, placing the folder on my desk. That's from Darren. Inside was a memo. Subject, Future of Haverly Operations Leadership based on recent feedback. Internal morale shifts and productivity metrics. The board is extending a formal offer for Margaret Allen to remain as Director of Operations beyond the interim period. Proposed term, 2 years, with mentorship and succession planning clause. Below that was a contract, clean, generous, complete with a bonus. Clause I hadn't seen in decades. I sat with the letter all weekend. I knew what it meant, what it would feel like to sign it. It would mean taking up more time, more energy, more space. It would mean fully replacing my own son, and I couldn't pretend it wasn't personal. It was personal, not because I needed revenge, but because I needed restoration. Brian had erased me with a whisper. This was the board speaking louder still. Part of me hesitated. On Sunday evening, I stepped outside for a walk. I passed the park where I used to push Brian on the swing after work, the corner cafe where I bought him a muffin on his first day of kindergarten, the bus stop bench where I once fell asleep waiting after a night shift. All those years. That sacrifice. He never once asked what it cost me. He only counted what he thought I owed him. Monday morning. Brian was waiting for me in the lobby. He didn't say anything at first, just followed me silently to the elevator. "Why are you here this early?" Kai asked, punching the 5th floor. "I need to talk," he said, "please." I let the silence right up to the 5th floor with us. In my office. He finally sat down. "I know they offered you the position permanently," he said, avoiding eye contact. "Yes. They told me Friday." Clara didn't want to, but Darren said I had to hear it from someone. I waited. He looked different, smaller somehow. Like the weight of his choices had finally started to land. I'm not going to lie, it hurts. "Being replaced?" I asked gently. "No," he said, surprising me, knowing I deserved it. "That caught me off guard," he went on, voice lower. "When you left, I thought it was finally my time. I wanted to prove I could lead. That I wasn't just your son, I was better than you. Is that what you think leadership is?" I asked. "Outshining the people who raised you?" "No," he whispered. "But it's what I acted like, and I see that now." The room went quiet again. He stood. "I'm not asking you not to take the job. I need to say I'm sorry. For the party, for the way I've treated you, for forgetting what you built." I studied him. My son. The boy I raised on bedtime stories and leftover pasta. The man who forgot me in a room full of cupcakes. "I didn't come back to humiliate you, Brian," I said. "I came because this place was falling apart. And because, for the first time in a long time, I remembered that I was damn good at what I do." "I know," he said softly, "and I'm not angry anymore. I'm just done shrinking." He nodded, eyes wet but not falling. Before he turned to leave, he asked, "Can I come to the next team strategy meeting? Just to listen?" I thought a second. "You can sit in," I said, "but you'll be taking notes." Later that day, I signed the contract, not out of vengeance, out of clarity. I was finally reclaiming what had always been mine, not the title, not the office, not even the paycheck, but my voice. In the next staff meeting, I brought out the whiteboard and wrote, "Respect isn't inherited, it's earned, and so is trust." People nodded. Brian sat quietly at the edge of the table. Pen in hand, he didn't interrupt, didn't deflect. He wrote every word down. The sun was shining the day I actually retired. Not the forced exit party they threw the first time. No, this time it was real. And it was mine. There were flowers, fresh ones, not plastic carnations from the grocery store. There were handwritten letters in envelopes stacked on the reception table, tied together with a ribbon. The intern team had made a slideshow of memories. Photos from over the decades, me with a phone tucked to my shoulder, helping coordinate a broken printer while holding a crying toddler who belonged to a panicked new employee. Me organizing charity drives. Me training for different CEOs, executive assistants. But more than anything, the room felt warm, genuine, even the wallpaper seemed to glow. I stood near the podium as Darren opened the celebration. 37. Years ago, a woman walked into this building and quietly became the engine behind everything that worked. For most of us, she was the problem solver, the fixer, the one who stayed after everyone went home. But for those who looked closely, she was something more. He paused. She was the soul. The applause that followed wasn't polite. It was powerful. People clapped with their whole hands. Some stood. I saw Clara wiping her eyes. I blinked back my own tears as I stepped to the microphone. I'd had weeks to prepare a speech, but now that I was here, I realized I didn't need notes. I just needed to speak the truth. When I started at Haverly, I began. I didn't know how long I'd stay. I was young, newly widowed, raising a 4-year-old on my own. This job wasn't supposed to be a career, was supposed to be survival. A soft hush fell over the room, but something happened along the way. I found pride in doing the unglamorous work. I took joy in steadying things when everything else felt unstable. I stayed because every time someone asked for help and I was able to say, "I've got you," it reminded me that I mattered. I looked toward Brian standing in the back of the room. He was listening, really listening. I wasn't always. Thanked. And sometimes I was taken for granted. But I've come to learn something very important. Something I hope you all carry with you long after today. I paused, let the silence settle. Respect isn't something people give you. Something you give yourself first and then protect like your life depends on it. 'Cause sometimes it does. There was a stillness in the room, the kind that says we needed to hear that. I smiled gently and added, "I'm not leaving bitter. I'm leaving better." Because I got the chance to finish this story on my own terms. As the applause rose, again, Brian stepped forward. I hadn't asked him to speak. No one had. But he walked up slowly and asked for the mic. I tilted my head, unsure if I should allow it, but handed it to him anyway. He turned to the crowd and then to me. I didn't plan on saying anything, he said, because, to be honest, I didn't think I deserved to speak at her retirement. He glanced down, composed himself. There was a time when I thought my mother's strength was inconvenient, quiet, passive, something to step past. Something that was always there, like a light switch or a water tap. You use it and you never think about who keeps it running. The room was frozen, but I was wrong. She wasn't passive. She was patient. She wasn't weak. She was the strongest person I've ever known. And I spent years walking past her like she was the wallpaper in my life. And I'm sorry. He turned to face me. "Mom, thank you for taking the job I thought I earned and showing me how to truly earn it." I hadn't planned on crying that day, but I did. Not out of pain, but out of something closer to relief. Later that night, after the celebration wound down and the lights dimmed, I sat alone in my now empty office. A stack of farewell cards sat beside me. One read, "You made me feel safe in a world that doesn't care about quiet people. Thank you, Ms. M." Another, "If I ever become a leader, I want to do it like you, softly, powerfully, with grace." I ran my fingers across the polished surface of the desk one last time. Then there was a knock. Brian peeked in. "Can I walk you out?" I stood, grabbing my coat. "Sure." We took the elevator down together, quiet. As we reached the front doors, I turned to him. "Brian." He looked at me, eyes filled with a new kind of respect. "Don't let them silence. The next person like me, the one who doesn't shout, it's the one who holds things together with kindness, not commands." He nodded. "I won't. And if you forget," I added with a gentle smirk, "I'll come back again, just to remind you." He laughed, and we stepped into the cool night. The street outside hadn't changed, but I had. I wasn't the woman who slipped out the side door of a party meant to erase her. I was the one who walked out the front, head held high, knowing she had taught the building to remember what mattered most. The people who build quietly, the hands that hold, the souls that stay. And for the first time in decades, I wasn't carrying the weight of silence. I was walking in the strength of being seen. If this story moved you, don't forget to subscribe, like, and share. Someone out there needs this reminder too.